Hello and good evening. On behalf of Carnegie Mellon University and all of the organizers of tonight's event, welcome to this year's Living Legacies Black History Month keynote address. My name is Brittany Claude, and I'm a first-year MBA and Master's of Science in Public Policy and Management student here at Carnegie Mellon. I am also the Vice President of the Black Graduate Student Organization. As a Black graduate student at one of the nation's premier universities, at the helm of technology, innovation, and progress in social entrepreneurship, I am mindful and thankful of the sacrifices that have been made before me so that I and millions of students of color can enjoy an education, an opportunity to pursue my American dream, to speak freely, to befriend and learn from students all over the nation and the world, and to live the promise of those like Ernest Green, our fathers, grandmothers, and great-great-grandfathers that struggled so that we wouldn't have to. A chance to simply learn in the same classroom. To me, Black History Month is one moment of many to acknowledge, reflect, and celebrate these sacrifices. Where we have come, where we are now, and the work that still needs to be done. We are very fortunate to have a living legacy here with us tonight, a walking remembrance of the struggle for equality and of the strength of our never-ending faith in justice and hope for the future. Thank you so much for joining in the celebration of Living Legacies and Black History Month at Carnegie Mellon University. Once again, welcome, and please enjoy tonight's event. I'd like to bring Kamal to the stage to introduce our speaker.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kamal Ibrahim, and I'm a senior here at Carnegie Mellon University, majoring in mathematics. I'd like to thank those who came out to support us, and I also like to thank those who support us remotely. Thanks to Chanel, too, for her efforts in helping us organize this event. I mean, it's just amazing how a small idea can go so far with the right people and the right push. Tonight, I've been given the privilege and the honor to introduce our guest keynote speaker, a man who, in the face of extreme hardship and extreme controversy, pulled himself into a better way of living. He was the oldest of one of the oldest of the Little Rock Nine, and one of the youngest to receive the NAACP Springer Medal. In 1999, he and other members of the Little Rock Nine were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest honor given to any civilian, by President Bill Clinton, sorry. After being the first African American to graduate under the not new now, but the Supreme Court ruling in 1958, he went on to pursue higher education and also continue to fulfill his mission in supporting our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, may we please welcome Mr. Ernest Green.
Thank you very much, Kamal. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. And so far, I've had an enjoyable time at Carnegie Mellon. I'd like to spend some time this evening talking both about the past and what's been impressive. I had dinner tonight with a group of young people that I think are going to go places. Various majors in science and technology and engineering, and it made me feel that the struggle that we had in Little Rock was on point, that we were in the right direction and going to the right place. Dr. King talked about his dream, and you know that trying to bring this dream closer to coming true is really the struggle that this country has had to deal with. But sometimes in order to look ahead, we need to look back. You read about the day when I, as a teenager, one of 9 scared teenagers walking up the steps of Little Rock Central High School. And I'll talk a little bit about those days, but first I want to go further back. I want to tell you what it was like in a place and a time when people couldn't imagine living the way that you live here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. Imagine me when I'm a 6-year-old downtown in a store in Little Rock. It's blistering hot. There was a time before air conditioning, and this audience looks too young to remember that. I needed a drink, headed for the water fountain, but a store attendant blocked my path. I'd made a terrible mistake. I tried to drink at a whites-only water fountain. Grown-up couldn't let that happen. Couldn't let a 6-year-old get a drink of water. And while later, my family goes to hear a band concert at a public park in Little Rock, we get to the gate, a policeman stops us, said, "This is off limits to colored people." Here I am with my father, who fought for this country in France in World War I, turned away at a public park. And then there's the story of my grandfather, who thought he would vote in a Democratic primary. He had the nerve to show up at a polling place. Not only did they turn him away, but they pulled a gun on him. And then there's the story of my mother. She got a Master's of Education, University of Arkansas, back in 1951. My sister actually remembers the day the postman brought a package with a cap and gown and a diploma, and a letter acknowledging her accomplishments, but that same letter informed her that she would not be welcome on campus to march in the procession. Why? Obviously, she was the wrong color. My sister tells me she would never forget the look of hurt and disgust in her eyes as she crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. There are those who argued that we had separate but equal systems in Little Rock and other places throughout the South, but we knew differently. We knew when we opened up textbooks given to us only when they were too worn out for the other school. You know some of what happened in Little Rock. You've seen the pictures of that day in '57. 9 of us piled into cars with Jeeps in front, Jeeps in back, and then walked up the steps into Central High School to become his first African-American students. I sometimes get embarrassed when people congratulate me for what I did. You know, ball players like to point out that there's no I in the word team. The same here. Our neighbors, the leaders of our community, our parents, all had a vision of what this would mean. They knew that if we climbed those steps, black people would be a step closer to freedom. Because what happened in Court Square in Montgomery, Alabama, and at Central was well central. Central to the issue that I believe has most plagued America. Central to the issue that has caused more turmoil, turbulence, and strife than any other. Central to the issue that remains still its greatest social burden, the issue of race. Yes, the Founding Fathers wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." But these same Founding Fathers, Jefferson, Washington, had plantations housing hundreds of slaves. I believe it was racism that sustained slavery, and slavery caused the Civil War. It was racism that 30 years after the Civil War could allow the court to decide in Plessy versus Ferguson that Homer Plessy could not sit in a whites-only railroad car. Why not? Because he had a black great-grandmother. It was racism that sustained the era of Jim Crow, of lynchings, of discrimination in every phase of life, from getting a job to expressing a point of view, certainly drinking from a water fountain. And as you know, education. In 1899, the good governor of Mississippi put it this way: education only spoils a good field hand. It's money thrown away. Did I know all that? Sure. But it was only on that day that it sunk in. It was only when we heard the parents screaming at us, jeering at us, chanting to the white students to stay away. Only when a monitor got me from my physics class and said the mob might break through the barricades and send us home. That's when I began to see the full dimension of what was wrong. Eventually, you saw the pictures. We got in, took a convoy of soldiers, took soldiers with machine guns mounted on jeeps and paratroopers and helicopters and soldiers with drone bayonets. I was scared, certainly scared stiff. How could you not be scared? The governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, said blood would run in the streets of Little Rock. We got bomb threats, phone calls, letters that claimed we would be lynched. After gym class, students would steam up the locker room so no one could see and throw wet towels at Terrence and myself and broken glass. I've never forgotten one time in a lunch line when a boy was calling out insult after insult to Minnie Jean Brown, and I was going to suggest she tell him to stop. Minnie Jean had a better idea. She dumped a bowl of chili on his head. With the perspective of almost a half a century, I have to say I admire that. But I have to admit that when I see those documentaries about that month, there's something that rings false. They focus on the visuals, the troops, the news conferences, the screaming mobs that were part of the story. But maybe most people in Little Rock didn't want to see us hurt, but they certainly wanted to see us fail. They wanted to be able to say that Ernie Green couldn't understand physics. We weren't going to let that happen. Our families weren't. Our community wasn't, and we, the 9 students, especially weren't. Now people say we were heroes. Well, if there was anything heroic about that time, it wasn't just what people saw on the television. It was what went on each night when we opened our books. But when the cameras were off, we worked on. The next month, when Sputnik was launched and the network stopped covering us, we never stopped. Do a math problem as well as anybody else. Write a paper, learn history. We had a lot of help. Yes, our leaders were noble men and women, but the heroes of the Civil Rights Revolution weren't only its leaders. There were also thousands of people going to meetings, walking in demonstrations, registering to vote, leading organizations, and helping with homework. I believe you can't have a revolution unless everyone takes part. I always tell people who honor people like me, as you honor us, remember those not here. You give too much credit to those who are. That's what led to that day in May when Martin Luther King sitting beside my family and I got set to get my diploma, the first African American to graduate from Little Rock Central. Everybody's been clapping as each of the white students walked across the stage. When I walked across the stage, nobody clapped except for my family. But you know what? I felt good anyway. I'd cracked the wall, others would come through it, and that was what I was there to do. Now I believe there are big revolutions and small ones. How significant was the Civil Rights Revolution our group in Little Rock helped set in motion? I believe it was monumental. It was much more than seeing black and white children sit in the same classroom. It set in motion the forces that would bring forth the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 65 Voting Rights Act, and the 68 Fair Housing Act. And I wish they could have seen what happened over the next 10 years. Brown v. Board of Ed and events like mine did more than integrate schools. They made us ask the question, what else can we do? In fact, you can go all the way to Cairo and see that that question is being asked tonight. There were so many areas: getting served in a restaurant, attending a concert, drinking from a water fountain, getting hired for good jobs. And in the next 10 years, we chipped away. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was the result. A while back, I heard a story from Senator Dale Bumpers, the longtime Arkansas senator. It's also in a book he wrote. He made me realize how things had changed between those who wanted an education and those who blocked the door. Governor Faubus, you remember me mentioning him, the one who predicted blood would run in the streets. He became an ex-governor. He desperately wanted some federal money for some projects he had cooked up. One day he went to visit Senator Bumpers and asked for help. And Bumpers said, well, who's in charge of that money? Faubus looked very sad. He said, Ernie Green.